I still love that one. I tell you, it's great to see you here this morning. Did we have a great week last week? If you were here, you got to hear Cameron Babb, and he did a great job sharing his story, and man, had so many compliments of how God had touched people's lives, and just things where we saw, and man, the guy, he just oozes Jesus. You know, it's just amazing to see that. So I have a little story to tell you. Yesterday, Charlene and I celebrated our 40th anniversary, and yeah, please, that's the God's glory that she's put up with me that long. And so I got to tell you, we were, had a great time. We took a couple of days away, and yesterday we were headed back home, and we stopped for breakfast. And as we stopped to have breakfast, we went in. We had a great time just talking there at the table and everything, and remembering, going back to the day we got married and all that stuff, and things that we would have done differently. It wasn't many. We were just thankful that we've made it this far, and it's been a great time and a lot of fun and adventure. And I will say this, you're always tested the most when something like this comes up, I feel like anyway. Are you going to do this? My wife, on the way to the car, she looked at me, and I just told her, said, I just want you to know I love you. And she said, I love you more. And I was like, oh, that's so sweet. And then we get into this tussle argument back and forth. No, I love you more. No, I love you more. And back and forth like that. And so I promptly got right into the car. We have decided this car is her car, and she lets me drive it. From time to time, got in it, and as we were leaving, trying to hasten to the place where we were going to do a little shopping there. She was going to do a little shopping. I was going to tag along. And as we were backing out, I backed into a car and ruined the whole back fender of her car. And I immediately looked at her and said, do you still love me more? It was crazy. It took a few minutes. I had to go find the person, and all this stuff. It was crazy to let them know that I'd done it and everything. So, it's what it is. It's just a car, just another deductible. Anyway, you go through things, and it causes you to think. I don't know if you've gone through some worries or problems or anxiety or anything like that. I have had plenty over my days in my life, and I have had times where it's just like, oh God, are you there? Do you know what's going on? Do you understand? And if you remember, we've been doing this series on Buckle Up, and a lot of you are like, when is this ever going to be over? And we'll be over when we're over, okay? When we get to the end of the book, which will be next Sunday. And as we've gone through 1 Peter, we have been finding that there's this group of people that Peter, one of Jesus' followers, one of his disciples, one of his ones that had some royal mess-ups, but also was an incredible leader. He wrote this letter to a group of Christians that were spread out all over Asia Minor. And they were in different locations, different cities, and they were being persecuted for their faith in Jesus. One of the things that was difficult was that the emperor at the time of the Roman government that was in charge then was Nero. And Nero was definitely, he had it out for Christians. There's no question about it. There's lots of history that went with the Roman government and everything about the church. But this was a time when Christianity and following Jesus definitely was a threat to the government. At least they thought it was, because it was taking away from the way the Roman government saw things. And quite honestly, they were seeing some amazing things happen. People were turning to follow Jesus on a regular culture, Greeks and Romans that were living at that time. And their way of living was definitely all about doing for yourself, getting what you wanted and everything. And the people who were Christians were actually starting to follow the teachings of Jesus, which was to actually give their life for him and to take care of other people. So this was a mark of the Christian faith, was to actually care for other people, people that were marginalized. And so as we have seen in this, they have responded in lots of ways. The last time I was here was the week before Cameron was with us last week, and we shared about the idea that really suffering, everybody's going to go through suffering and persecution. There's going to be times, but the only person that you can go to and to know the solid foundation for your life is always going to be that personal relationship with God. And it's going to be that through Jesus himself. And Jesus made it possible by his death on the cross, because there he took on the debt we owe for our sin, and he paid for it. And then he rose from the dead, which means he got the victory over the thing that we all face because of our sin, and that's death. And he got the victory over that. And so by believing in those things, they were passing this on, and they were being persecuted for it, but it was giving them strength at the same time. And so they were very counterculture to what was going on, but not by protesting and not by trying to go against and try to get a militia against the Roman government or anything like that. They did it by the way they lived. They did it by the way that they treated other people. And so that was what was the mark of these people. So we've watched it all this time, and the relation is that Peter wrote to them, but he wrote for us. And so we would be able to apply that in our lives this way, is that in our culture today, sometimes, and even more so lately than even before, we've seen Christianity come under attack because of maybe it being handled the wrong way. In other words, using the Bible more as a club than as the principles to live our life by so we love other people. And so that's what really the application for us is how do we make it through the tough times, the difficult times, when the culture is really warring against Christianity and warring against God and Jesus? How do we become countercultural, and how do we actually, in doing that, how do we represent this faith and this teaching that Jesus gave? All right, so that's where we find ourselves today. And before we even go any further, remember, these people were being persecuted. They would wake up every day wondering whether or not this would be the day they would give their life, that they would have to give their life, or something would be taken away from them or whatever, because they believed in Jesus. And so you can imagine what kind of anxiety would be in their hearts. I mean, imagine waking up every day wondering whether that was it, whether you were going to come under fire in such a way, or feeling like you had to hide, or that you had to run. You were always on the run, trying to avoid those kinds of persecutions or anything like that. Some of us today, we wake up with anxiety and worry and trouble and fear on a regular basis, and sometimes we don't see the value or the basis of our faith being the strength for it. And so here's where we kind of come to this point. And I want to ask you, after we've looked at all of this, and we've encouraged everyone to buckle up and get ready, because our lives are in the hands of God, and He's the only one that can give us a secure way to be buckled up and to have safety and security. I want to take you to this question. Does God care about what worries me? I mean, really think about it. Do you ever ask that question? Does God care about what worries me? Not just me, but you. I mean, does it worry? You have worries on your heart right now? Things that are really difficult and hard to consider, and wonder whether God really cares or if He's with us. And here's another thing. How can I find stability during times of trouble and anxiety? Where do I go? How do I find it? Where's the real foundation of it? Because I think many people who want to cry out to God will say, it's good, I pray and I read the Bible, but it's like I need something solid. I need something concrete. I need to feel it like it's right in front of me. I need to touch it. I need someone who it feels like if Jesus could be here present and He could just put His arm around me and pat me on the back and encourage me and tell me things that I need. I mean, that would be amazing, right? But with Him not here yet, all right, He's not here yet. He says He'll return, but He's not here yet. Where do we go and what do we do? Which brings us to that question, who cares? Not who cares in an apathetic way, but who is really out there caring? Who really cares about the problems and the issues and the things that are a part of it? Peter knew that early church, when he was writing to them, that they would need to hear some things that are important, but he also knew that it was critical. It was critical for those of us who would read this in the future. I don't think Peter knew how widespread that would be. There would have been no way he would have understood that. But man, what an effect it can have for us if we think about it. Who cares? Who is around us right now that cares? And we know that God's promised He cares and He loves us. But how does that play out in our everyday life when we're looking for concrete evidence of it? And we need it. We need that strength. Well, I'm going to take you to chapter 5 of 1 Peter, and we're just going to walk through where Peter believed it, where he thought it was lying. He knew where it was. He knew where you could go. So let's go to that passage, and let me read it for you, and you follow along. He says, "To the elders among you, I appeal as a fellow elder and a witness of Christ's sufferings, who also will share in the glory to be revealed." When he speaks of elders here, he's talking about the leaders within the church. So in those different cities, there were people who were established. There were ones who were leaders within the church that were there teaching and encouraging and bringing them along and helping them meet needs. I mean, they had a plan, a strategy for their churches. They had a way that they do it. We have a strategy here of what we do in this community and for each other. We have a strategy of how we do that. And they did too. And they had leaders that were a part of that, just like we do. To the elders among you. And Peter knew because he was a fellow elder. He has been there. He was a part of the early church himself. And now he was like a pastor to pastors. He was the one who was actually encouraging all the leaders to take the steps they needed. And so as he did this, this is what he says to them. If all of this is going to happen and we're going to witness Christ's sufferings, you see that right in front of you. You'll also share in the glory to be revealed when Jesus returns. It's like this, don't forget what's in the future here. But for them, it was very real. I mean, think about the problems and issues that they faced every day. It's sometimes hard to get the picture of something great that's supposed to happen in the future when you're going through something tough right in front of you. That's when the distraction comes. That's when it becomes so hard to actually think, okay, I can make it through this because that will ultimately be the finish line. That'll ultimately be the prize or the end of it when I'll actually see God's glory in it all. So here's what he says. He tells them then in verse 2, "Be shepherds of God's flock that is under your care." He's talking to the leaders. He's talking to the pastors. And you might say, well, Greg, is this sermon just for you today? Actually, I want to encourage you to think about this. We're going to get to a word in this passage that's going to tell us that it's for every one of us. But at first, he does speak to the leaders. He speaks to the ones who are there, and he says, "Be shepherds." And this would have related well to them because, the sheep industry was big back then. That was what a lot of people did. And so understanding what a shepherd would do, he speaks of it as everybody who is a believer is like in a flock, like sheep. All of us are like sheep. And he says, being in God's flock, they're under your care as a shepherd. So you're there making sure that there's things taken care of. And so he explains then what that care looks like. It's not just caring for people. It's more than that. It actually it's got more of a definition. So the verses go on and it says, watching over them. And when we say watching, it means just an oversight. It's looking and looking ahead. What's coming? What's going to happen? What's happening out? A pastor or a leader should look at what everyone in the church is facing and then tries to do everything possible to encourage them to stand up against the things that they're facing and try to encourage their faith to grow and even help them through conflict and issues that they don't know how to navigate themselves. And so it goes on, not because you must, but because you are willing. Not because you must. It's not a fact of doing it because of guilt. It should never be because of guilt. It should be because of something that you feel called to do, a desire deep in your heart to be a leader in the situation. And it goes on, he says, as God wants you to be. God wants you to be willing, not feeling guilty to do the job of a leader. And then it goes on, not pursuing dishonest gain, but eager to serve. See, it'd be very easy. They had established a way then, and which carries on even today. And I want to say thank you for this. But the churches would come together and actually bring and take offerings so that the care of the leader of the flock, or the leaders of the flock, would actually be cared for so that they could focus on the needs of the people and prepare and to be ready to lead them through the issues that were going on and to lead the church. And so they took care of their needs. He made sure that they had the things necessary to live their lives so their anxieties and their worries of how to care for their family would be taken care of. So even in the early church, they took care of the leaders. But you don't do it for that reason. You don't do it just to gain something from it. It's not meant to be just a job or a placement or a position. You actually want to be eager to serve. That's a huge part of this. Eager to serve, meaning that the passion doesn't run out. Oh, from time to time, trust me, it gets a little low, all right? But really, the idea is that you're not there. This is not meant to be a job. This is something that you would do for free, right? Make sense? But eager to serve. But then he goes on, and he says, you got to be careful because in a position of power, especially in the church, and let's just face it, many of us have faced this before. I have faced it. I'm sure you have faced it. I hope you're not facing it now. I would not want that to be the case. You got to let me know if it is. All right? He says, not lording it over those entrusted to you, but being examples to the flock. Here's what's critical. Here's what's critical to understand that he says. Not lording it over those, not using the position of being a leader in the church to actually manipulate people or get them to do things or to make them feel guilty or actually to move them in and out or to treat them a certain way only and have favorites. You can't do that. That's lording it over. That's leading with the purpose, with an agenda that is not pure, that is not right. And unfortunately, a lot of us have probably gone through this, where we've either been in a church situation and over church history. I'm sure even back then it was going on, or Peter wouldn't have included it. That there were people who were leading the church and they were doing it, and their personalities got in the way, or their desires or what they wanted, and they led with the idea it's my way or the highway, rather than leading from a point of being an example to the flock of what it's supposed to be. And like I said, I wouldn't want anybody in this church to feel like that was the case here. That would be the worst mark on a church, would be that leaders manipulate people and do whatever's necessary to get them to do whatever they want them to do. And we've all been there. We've either had a boss or a family member. We've had someone, maybe it's been in a church, and actually it hurt your heart because of the way they treated you, the way they did something to you. They manipulated you. I've been manipulated before. I know exactly what that feels like. It doesn't feel good. It's awful. It makes you want to give up your faith even at times. I want to tell you, there's been instruction given to leaders. So there's really no excuse for a leader to back off and say, I didn't know. I didn't know I was supposed to be that way. I didn't know I should act that way or whatever. No. He says, don't lord over them. All of these other things, watch over them, care for them, take care of them, do everything that's necessary. But a leader should never, and this is a leader no matter where you are. So now, may I shift gears and say, it's not just for pastors. When he says, you got to do this to be examples to the flock, that means that the teaching is not just for the leaders or the pastor or whoever who was leading those people or the leaders among them. It had to do with everybody. Everybody was to care for each other, care for other people the same way that shepherds or leaders were supposed to do that. And he says, you being an example, if you're an example to the flock, then you're doing everything you can to equip them and empower them to do the work themselves. Unfortunately, in my early church experience, I grew up in a certain denomination, and as I grew up in that denomination, I can tell you that it was always the idea that the church paid the pastor to do everything. That the pastor was responsible to do all the visitation, to go out, and when somebody was sick, he went and did that. When there was something, if the bathroom needed to be painted or the toilet needed to be fixed, it was the pastor's job. Why? Because he was paid by the church to do those things. And actually, the whole idea was that many of those pastors got away from being examples because they were so busy doing other things. So busy doing other things. I knew one pastor once, and his job was anything that needed to be done. He cut the grass at the church. He actually they had a bus where they would go out into the community and pick up children. He drove the bus, but on the Saturday before, he would go around and make sure he knew all the kids and their families of who were going to ride the bus. He had to have that message done. Back in the day, there was church on Sunday nights too. So he had to have a message on Sunday and a message on Sunday night. And then there was always, and for those of you who are church people who have been around a long time, what was on Wednesday? Prayer time, which we only prayed about 5 minutes, and there was always a big sermon in the middle, right? But we called it prayer meeting or whatever. You get the idea? This is how it was structured. And it was a wrong way to think about it, honestly. The idea is that we've got a bigger job to do than caring for the building or caring for just a few people. We have a calling as a church to be an example and to be countercultural to everything. And the pastor, the leaders, okay, plural, were to be examples to the flock. They were supposed to lead the charge, not get so far out in front that you're mistaken for the enemy, okay? But you are leading in front, taking people through this and caring for each other. That was the example, was to watch out for each other. And the shepherd, the leader, was supposed to set the pace for that and do everything necessary, but to train people. Why? Because the greatest example was Jesus himself. Look at the next verse. It says, "And when the chief shepherd appears, you will receive the crown of glory that will never fade away." The chief shepherd. Any idea who that is? The real boss, okay? The real one in charge, and that's Jesus. He's the one that's in charge of this church and every church. He's the one that was in charge of the churches that Peter wrote to and the ones that he wrote this for. All of us. Jesus is the chief shepherd, and he will appear someday. And when he does, he's going to say to those leaders, "Thank you." And he's going to reward them for that if they did it with the right motivation, if they did it with the Spirit of God behind them. That's when that will come. So it's not something to say, "Oh, great, I got a good one coming." Okay? I can't say, I won't be walking around heaven going, "Thank you all for this. Appreciate it. You all made this possible." Because I think the rewards are really going to be given so that we can turn around and give them back. And honestly, I wouldn't be that presumptuous to think that every pastor is going to get one, okay? And so I know my heart has to be right. I know I have to be where I have to be, and I have to be close to Jesus. I can't count on the fact that just because I had a position and just because you guys, for whatever reason, trusted me to be the leader, that you did that, or any of the pastors or any of the staff, I couldn't be presumptuous enough to think that I'm just going to walk into heaven and say, "Okay, give it up. Where is it? I've been waiting my whole life. Where's my crown? Where's my reward?" So this is something that Jesus sets the example for. Let me just go back and review it this way. Leaders, they rise in times of trouble. Peter knew that. That's what they were to do. He was saying, rise to be an example. Make sure. It's more of this mentality. I get to do this versus I have to do this. I get to do this. This is a privilege to be able to be a leader in the church. And then on top of that, to them be an example. So for all of us, we get to do this. We get to care for each other. We get the opportunity to do these things. So it's not about whether or not we're, it's how much the church does for me. It's what God allows me to do within it. See? And leaders always look forward. They look forward to serving no matter the circumstances. Leaders are not self-promoters. They're not there to be all about them. And leaders show the way to go without being bossy. Anybody have anybody in your life that's bossy? Huh? Anybody have somebody like that? Yeah, no, not me. Yeah, we all have somebody who's been that or represented that, right? Leaders are supposed to show the way to go without being bossy. In other words, not more about being in charge. It's not about being in charge. It's about leading and being an example, and if the people are really following. and taking up the ownership of being an example. And he goes on in the passage, it says, in the same way, you who are younger, submit yourselves to your elders. I happen to have a group of younger people sitting on the front row here today, which I am so glad that you're here. Hi, Emmy. How are you? Good. I'm glad. So I speak to just you guys, but I'm speaking to anybody who's younger, all right? The whole idea is that you guys are going to be the leaders in the future. But actually, you guys are the leaders now. You're not just leaders in the future. When the church is, someday I'll grow up and be, No, you're a leader now. You guys actually set the pace. When there were pictures of you on the screen at the beginning of the service, I think all of you, you're represented there. High school students that have made the choice to give days to serve in our community. That was powerful, all right? You were leading the rest of us and encouraging us. You were being examples. And 22 middle schoolers will do that this week. Oh, God, help us, okay? It'll be fantastic. I'm looking forward to it. It's going to be great, okay? It's going to be great. But the whole point is that submit yourselves to your elders. And that does not mean just because any of us are older than you that you submit. It's actually saying, I got to do everything I can to learn from the people that are older than me and learn the things to do and the things not to do. Okay? There's a lot of those too. Okay? The idea is but be willing for God to use you to be an example yourself. Verses go on in the same way, but all of you, now he's like saying, okay, everybody, not just the young people, not just the people that are younger, but all of you clothe yourselves with humility toward one another because there's a reason. Because God has a standard by which he operates. And it's a reason because he opposes this. He opposes the proud because of a reason. Because that's what started the whole sin thing in the first place was pride. So you'd understand why God was so against it. So it says, clothe yourselves in humility toward one another because God opposes the proud but shows favor to the humble. So then, what's he do? After he says this standard, he then says in the next verse, humble yourselves, therefore, under God's mighty hand, that he may lift you up in due time. See, here's the thing. Humility has everything to do with other people. It has nothing to do with you. When you can get your mind off of yourself and you start to put your energy behind other people, taking care of other people and looking at other people. You see, he started with the leaders and he said, this is the example that it has to be. This is how you should be. You should be caring for other people and doing this. And obviously, when you care for other people, you're setting yourself up to be humble. Doesn't mean you are, but it's setting yourself up. It's when you actually start to think about other people and you don't ever really think about yourself or what you're going to gain from it or being appreciated for it or being recognized for it. You actually see it happening and you see other people's need. That's humility. That's what humility is. And so he just says you've got to do it this way. I'm going to take it back and just kind of give you this statement for all of us in summary. It says this, we lead each other through times of trouble with Jesus as our example. We do that in a few ways from what the passage told us. The first one is this, it's more than being available. How many times do we say to people when we see that they're in need or they're going through something, we say, hey, here for you, here for you, here for you, praying, the whole text thing, praying. I want to encourage you to do something, okay? Rather than text, either write out the prayer that you prayed for that person and send it to them so they can see the words that you spoke to God about them, or call them, or better yet even, get in a car or walk next door or down the hallway and tell them, hey, I'm here for you. What can I do for you right now? Can I just pray for you right now? What can I do? You want to go to lunch? You want to get coffee? You need something? Can I care for your kids? Can I come over? Can I bring a meal to you guys? What can I do? It's going. It's more than just being available. It's actually taking action on it, being intentional, saying, I'm not going to just say empty words. Just because somebody told you that they pray for you doesn't mean that they are. And how many times I say, well, that's not fair to say that about them. Well, how many times have we said, praying for you, and you really never did? See? It's an easy thing to see. It's got to be part of it. If you're going to pray for them, then be part of the answer. So it's more than just being available. It's also, practically, it is meeting the needs of others. In other words, if they need money, then maybe you should sacrifice something from your plan or what you're doing to give them some money to help them through, or just take care of a need. If you know something's going on, maybe the greatest thing you can do is take care of it. And this may be people you do or don't know. How many times have you gone through the grocery line or somewhere and you know that people are scraping up enough cash to pay for the supermarket bill? They're right in front of them. The numbers have rung up on the register, and they're like, and they're digging. A woman's digging through her purse, a man's looking through his wallet, and then he starts to maybe take things off the list and say, okay, take that off and take that off. You ever thought about just saying, hey, listen, I've got this, and you swipe your card instead? Can you imagine what that might be as an example to the people that we would do that to? Imagine. See, that's the kind of things that they were doing back then, and the leaders were the example of it, but they were caring for each other. They were taking care of the needs. And then not only that, but being appreciated. You can't do it for this reason. Being appreciated or recognized can't be our motivation. That can't be the reason you're doing it. Because, ladies, when was the last time somebody applauded when you vacuumed? Okay? Men, I don't know what you've done. Did you cut the grass this week? Maybe you vacuumed. Did the family all line up and go, what a great job, way to go? No, doesn't happen. And right, yeah, come on, students. You've probably been given chores, right? You do them, and your parents, they applaud and scream and holler. They throw a party because you got the chores done, right? I see. Yeah, I get it. Okay? You understand? It can't be the reason. It can't be the reason we do these things, because that doesn't come. The appreciation comes from the praise and the worship we give God for doing it in the first place. And then the last part, consider your influence and example with everyone. Just consider everyone you come in contact with should be someone that you're an example to. All of us are included in this, not just the pastors, not just the leaders, not just the shepherds, but every person is told this is how they clung to the care they needed. And you know how I know this? Because then he comes to the end of this passage, and this verse is how he wraps it up. And at first I thought, this verse doesn't go with these verses. And then the more I looked at it and read it, the more I realized how much it did. He says, cast all your anxiety on him because he cares for you. So if you're going to cast your care on God, then the way that God uses each of them, he had given them the practical structure where they were supposed to actually care for each other. That made it concrete. When we pray and cry out and want God in our life, what does it do? We actually have concrete proof and evidence of God's care when we care for each other and we look to each other and we take care of the needs of each other. That was the structure they needed back then. Imagine waking up every morning like they did, thinking that that day may be the end of their life. Wouldn't it be great to have friends around you, encouraging you and standing up for you, taking care of the needs? That's exactly what they did, and that's exactly the example to us. We can cast all our anxiety on Jesus. We can give it all to him because he loves and cares for us. He really does. If you think God doesn't care, look at who he is. From the examples all throughout the scriptures, you see that God cares about us. And he's given us practical ways to show that then to other people and remind each other of it. Just say this. Does God care about what worries me? I believe he does. I know he does. Because I've seen you. I've seen you care for each other, and I've seen you care for me. I know that. So I just say this. God cares about every aspect of our lives. And he uses us to be part of that care. He uses us to be part of that. That's how we know we can cast all our anxiety on him. He cares for us because he's given us each other. He's given a structure that works within the church. And it's not just for the pastor to do, it's for us to do for each other, for every one of us, intentionally reaching out.